Good day. This is the first PowerPoint in a series called SIAS Made Easy. The first PowerPoint focuses on the SIAS process. SIAS stands for Screening, Identification, Assessment, and Support. Now, you might be asking why the SIAS policy was drafted and implemented. Well, the function of a SIAS policy is to standardize the procedures for schools and districts to follow for supporting all children to learn. It is aimed at improving access to quality basic education for vulnerable learners and those who experience barriers to learning. These barriers could be the impact of poverty, language, inflexible curriculum implementation, discriminatory attitudes, disability, and others. The SIAS policy and process is based upon equity. As we know, each learner is a unique individual, and therefore he or she has their own unique individual needs. The concept behind the SIAS process is to support each learner to such an extent that he or she will achieve success within the learning process. The SIAS process. After admission, the completion of vulnerability assessment, as well as the completion of a learner profile, the teacher may come to the conclusion that the learner do not need any additional support. This, however, does not mean that the teacher will stop observing, conducting classroom assessments, or will stop reading and adding to the learner profile. The teacher will not stop screening or conducting learner and parent interviews. Why not? Because all these activities or procedures are there to inform lesson planning in order to make the process learner-centered. That is why the learner observation sheet is so important. As educators, we have many children in our class, and we tend to forget. So by the time we refer the learner, we make comments such as, the learner is experiencing difficulties, or the learner is presenting disciplinary challenges. But when asked to be more specific, we cannot remember when or where certain incidents took place, and that makes the referral process really difficult. That is why the learner observation sheet is so important. After admission, the completion of vulnerability assessment, as well as the completion of a learner profile, we might come to the conclusion that there are certain barriers to learning, or that the learner is at risk. The first and foremost and most important thing to do would be to contact the parents, as we do not follow any processes without the parents being informed and without the parents' permission. We also complete the SNA1, which should be signed by the parent, as well as an ISP, an individual support plan. This shows that we have tried certain intervention strategies. When, however, these strategies do not pan out, they're not successful, we can then refer the learner to the SPST, which is the school-based support team. When we refer the learner to the SPST, the ISP, individual support plan, is adjusted. Now, it can happen that together with the SPST, we do not know how to proceed. Then we may refer the learner to the DBST, which is the district-based support team. We might have problems identifying the specific needs of a learner, and then the support needs will not be clear, which will mean that we will have to investigate further. In other occasions, the support needs might be very clear, and we might continue with intervention. However, The intervention strategies must be monitored and reviewed, and that is why the learner observation sheet is so important. And that is why the ISP should also be updated after a specific time. If the support needs are not clear, further investigation is needed. As already mentioned, the teacher will observe a learner, conduct classroom assessments, read the learner's profile as well as add to it, screen the learner, and conduct learner and parent interviews. This may lead to two possible outcomes. Either the teacher will identify the barrier to learning and come to the conclusion that only simple adjustments or easy adjustments are needed, and after these small adjustments, the learner will no longer need support. Or barriers can be identified, and of course, the first thing that needs to be done is the parent needs to be consulted. The individual support plan must be adjusted, and further referrals may take place. The SPST may suggest that the learner be referred to a clinic, or that the LST withdraw the learner from the classroom for further assistance or intervention. The LST, the learning support teacher, may only withdraw learners once an SNA1 has been completed, the child has been discussed during the SPST, and the parent has been informed, and the parent gave permission that the learner be withdrawn from class. If, however, it is found that only a slight adjustment was needed, and after this adjustment no additional support is required, the teacher will, however, not stop observing the learner. Why? Because observation, classroom assessment, screening, and interviews inform lesson planning within a learner-centered approach. If the support needs are clear, the support must be monitored and reviewed. If a support is successful and no additional support is required, the teacher must continue to observe, to conduct classroom assessments. Why? Yes, because these actions inform lesson planning, which means that we continue to communicate with the parents and that we continue to fill in the learner observation sheet. If the support needs are clear and we've reviewed and monitored the support, but the support that was suggested by the SPST was not successful, we can again, for a second time, refer the learner to the SPST. And we tell the SPST that they've made suggestions, or we've made suggestions together, but that these intervention strategies were not successful. If, however, we found that no additional support is required, once again, teacher observation, classroom assessments, etc. will continue to take place. If, while we're observing the learner and conducting classroom assessments, we find other barriers or other barriers to learning are identified, then once again we contact the parent, we adjust the individual support plan, and we refer the learner for further testing. If all of these adjustments and interventions were successful, then we continue with teacher observation, classroom assessments, etc. If a support was unsuccessful, the teacher can then request the SPST to assist further. During the second SPST meeting, The school-based support team, along with the teacher, may decide that more specialized assistance is needed. That will then be communicated with the parent, as a child may not be referred to the DBST without the parent's consent. This learner will then be referred to the district-based support team for further assessment or intervention. The DBST will then draw up their own action plan. It is important that this action plan will then be implemented and reviewed by the educator or the class teacher. This will be done by filling in the learner observation sheet. If these interventions were successful and no additional support is required, the teacher will continue observing, conducting classroom assessments, etc. If, however, the DBST action plan is unsuccessful, then the DBST, the district-based support team, may make recommendations for outplacement. This will then mean that the child can be referred to a special school or a school of skills. As you can see, within the SIAS process, the learner, who is depicted by the picture in the center of the screen, allows the learner to be surrounded by those who are there to support the learner in order to achieve success within the learning process. We have a teacher, we have the caregivers, we have peers, as certain strategies that can be implemented to support the learner could be a buddy system. Then we have the SPST, the school-based support team, the LST, the learning support teacher, the DBST, the district-based support team, as well as community volunteers and NGOs. And if you look at this picture, all these role players form a net. And this net is there in order to prevent the learner from slipping through the gaps.